All right, everyone, we are live streaming now. So, hello to everyone who is on the call with us today, to the members of the Kentucky Commission on Women, and to the Lieutenant Governor, who is also a member of the Kentucky Commission on Women. Welcome to everyone who's joined us by Zoom today. Anyone who's watching us on our YouTube channel or who might be watching the archive of this at another time. My name is Heather Deering, and I am the Deputy Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor Coleman and staff to the Kentucky Commission on Women. I'm so pleased to be here today for this installment of our virtual Conversations with Commissioners series. The Kentucky Commission on Women was established in 1968 by Governor Louis Nunn by executive order, and then became an official state agency in 1970 through legislative action. After a period of dormancy, the commission was reactivated by Governor Beshear when he charged Lieutenant Governor Coleman with revitalizing it. Over the past several years, we've reestablished ourselves as the state agency whose mission is to strengthen, empower, and elevate women and girls in Kentucky. Our commissioners are an incredible and diverse group of women from all corners of the Commonwealth, and many of them are with us today. Due to time constraints, I will not call on all of our commissioners who are with us, but I will identify them. Today we have Ann Perkins, Ashley Atkins, Kathleen Wright, Patti Minter, and Susan Hirschberg with us, and we will probably have a few others trickling in as the call gets going. But we're so happy to have you here today, and thank you for joining us. When we launched our Conversations with Commissioners series, a live streamed virtual conversation between commissioners and guests about a topic or theme that we feel that is important to women in the Commonwealth, it was our intent to share these important conversations with the entire Commonwealth. We invite special guests who are knowledgeable or are experts in a particular area to present information, and when we have time to open it up for questions from our commissioners. The theme, the guest, and our commissioner host changes each conversation. And today's topic is the Equal Rights Amendment and Women's Equality Day. And while many people know a little bit about the Equal Rights Amendment, many people don't know about Women's Equality Day, which is actually next week. In 1973, the U.S. Congress designated August 26th as Women's Equality Day. This date was selected to commemorate the 1920 certification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, granting women the right to vote. While not a national holiday, the observance of Women's Equality Day not only commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment, but also calls attention to women's continuing efforts towards full equality. Workplaces, libraries, organizations like the Kentucky Commission on Women participate in Women's Equality Day by offering programs or other activities, much like we are today. So I'm excited to hand it over to our special hosts for this particular conversation and our guests because I am very fond of both of them. But with that, I am going to hand it over to Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman to kick us off with our conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Heather. And to all of the commissioners who are joining us today, hello. To everybody on the live stream or watching a recording, hello. It's so great to be with you all. And in just a few days, we're going to be celebrating a topic that's important to all of us, which is women's equality. And so that's why today's topic, the Equal Rights Amendment, is so important. And we have an expert guest with us today who those of us on this call know is a fellow member of the Kentucky Commission on Women, Patti Minter. And Patti is going to give us a nice history professor lesson, which she does best. But before she does that, I want to point out that women make up about 50% of the population in Kentucky. We recently released our Status of Women in Kentucky report that included some facts and figures about women in Kentucky. And one of the data points that we included in this report was that despite outperforming and outachieving academically, women in Kentucky who enter the workforce make 79 cents for every dollar that men make. So we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And so a quick intro of Dr. Patti Minter is that she served in the General Assembly from 2019 to 2023. When she was first elected in 2018 to represent Bowling Green's District 20 in the House of Representatives, she became the first woman from Warren County elected to the General Assembly. As professor of history at Western Kentucky University, where she's taught since 1993. Patti served as the elected faculty regent on the WKU Board of Regents from 2007 to 2014. And she received numerous awards in her community, including the WKU Award for Outstanding Public and University Service in 2016, and the Bowling Green Warren County Human Rights Commission's Women of Achievement Award in 2018. For her legislative work on capping the cost of insulin, she was named one of Kentucky Gazette's notable women in Kentucky politics and government. And for 2022, and honored as a healthcare hero by the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. In 2023, she was appointed to the Kentucky Commission on Women by Governor Andy Beshear, and we are so lucky to have her both here on the commission and with us as our special guest expert today. So I will turn it over to Dr. Patti Minter.
Oh, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for that gracious introduction. And I'm honored to be here, particularly talking to a fellow social studies teacher, as you were, because this is a historical story that is still very much in the making, and it is one of the longest social movements in American history. And certainly we can talk a little bit about why this one has seemed to be so difficult. But the story goes back to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Again, we're celebrating the anniversary of women's right to vote. And that's what the 19th Amendment did in 1920, said that the right to vote could not be abridged by sex. And that was a approximately 50-year struggle. And we see that a lot of women were anti-women's suffrage as well as pro-women's suffrage. And that's a part of the story that connects to the ERA later on. But for some women who had worked on the women's suffrage movement, suffrage was a good start, but it was only a good start. So in 1923, suffrage leaders Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman drafted the Equal Rights Amendment. And what they drafted is what was introduced in Congress in 1971. And it simply reads, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be abridged or denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." And this built on other work in the 1960s. We see the rise of women's rights as a social movement, as many women are going into the workforce and seeking equality, just like the men in their lives. In 1963, Congress heard that call and passed the first Equal Pay Act. There is still work to do, but it is the first time that U.S. Congress passed a law that would mandate that women had to have equal pay. Again, something that we continue to work on. And in 1964, in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII of that act includes in its protected categories of people whose civil rights must be protected by the federal government, it included sex as a category for the first time. So this was an idea whose time had absolutely come. And by 1971, again, advocates for women's rights start to push for bringing Alice Paul's amendment back and trying to get it through Congress. And in 1971, a female congressman from Michigan, Congresswoman Martha Griffiths, introduced Alice Paul's amendment. And that had 3 sections. The first section that I just read to you, the second section that allowed for any kind of enforcement legislation to be enacted, and the third section that had a phase-in. There would be a 2-year phase-in before the amendment went into effect if it was ratified. And it really did look like this was the time for equal rights to finally become part of the Constitution. It sailed through Congress. That might be a little difficult to believe right now, but people on both sides of the aisle were wildly enthusiastic and promoted this bill. To amend the Constitution, you have to have 2/3 votes out of both houses of Congress, which they got easily. And then it went out to the states. So in 1972, the House and Senate passed ERA by wide margins in a bipartisan fashion and sent it out to the states. Now, the Constitution says that you have to have 3/4 of the states ratify an amendment. So now the game switched to the state legislatures. And right now, with 50 states, the number is 38. You have to have 38 states that introduce the amendment in the legislature. Both houses have to give it a majority, a super majority, and then it has to be signed off and sent out. So again, this looked like an idea whose time had finally come. In 1972, this thing roared through the states, all over the country, every region of the country. Kentucky ratified the amendment in 1972. So right after Congress sent it out to the states, Kentucky jumped right on board, and very quickly they racked up 35 states that had ratified. So they're 3 states short, 3 states short. And this is where the problems began. By that time, there was the beginning of a backlash movement, a movement called Stop ERA. And a lot of the ideas that they had are very similar to the anti-suffrage movement of the 19th and early 20th centuries, arguing that this, was in opposition to many people's religious beliefs and a belief that this was going to alter women's place in society and that women should be in the home, and that this amendment might have some dangerous consequences. A lot of this was misinformation. There were a lot of things put out there that simply weren't true, but this backlash campaign did what it was supposed to do. It scared some people. And Stop ERA began to lobby in the remaining 15 state legislatures that had not yet ratified the amendment to try to make sure that it didn't come to the floor, or if it did, it got a negative vote. And then by 1978, the original bill that sent the amendment out to the states had a clock on it. And it looked like this would be an easy clock to beat, right? In 1972, 35 states quickly got on board, and they had to reach 38 by 1978. Congress extended the deadline. When 1978 came around, Congress extended the deadline to 1982. But what we're seeing is Stop ERA was trying to persuade many states not just to vote it down, but for states that had already ratified, they wanted them to do what is called recession. They wanted them to rescission. They wanted them to have a rescission vote and revoke their ratification. And that was tried in Kentucky. 1978, anti-ERA forces introduced this on the floor of the General Assembly, and they did, by a narrow margin, vote to have a rescission, that to roll back their ratification. Tennessee did it at the same time. And here's where we see why having women elected officials really does matter, because the lieutenant governor at the time was Lieutenant Governor Thelma Stovall. She'd been in the legislature and she'd served in other constitutional offices, and then she was the lieutenant governor. And as lieutenant governor, the governor was out of town, so she had the seat, and she vetoed the rescission vote. So Kentucky is officially still on the record as being one of the 35 states that has ratified the ERA. So, that's a good step. But it also shows that women elected officials can do things to move the ball forward for women. But from there on, the battle got nastier and nastier. And by 1982, when the clock expired, only 35 states had ratified the ERA. So there it sat until extremely recently. In the 21st century, there has been an effort to revive it, and 3 states who had not ratified the amendment before 1982 did so between 2017 and 2020, and those were Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia. And they did so because what's happened since 1982 is that globally, 85% of constitutions explicitly guarantee equal rights or prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex or gender. And Women's Equality Day is a reminder to us that it's past time for the United States to be a part of this statistic. This is not a radical idea. It's one that puts us squarely in the stream of what constitutions do and what rights they protect all over the world. So the ERA would not immediately remedy deep-rooted inequalities. But what it does do is it promises to build a more just and equitable society and does provide a legal remedy to protect against discrimination and to further women's rights and to strengthen legal protections to make sure that women have equality in every facet of life. So that's a historical perspective on where we've been and where we are at this moment.
Well, thank you so much, Patty. I've always wanted to take one of your history classes, but now I really do.
Aw, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have a few questions for you, and we might have some commissioners with questions too, but I'm going to kind of raise them and let you kind of continue to talk about this from different angles. But um, my first question is, were all women originally on board with the passage of the ERA, or what were some of the concerns about the passage?
It's such an interesting argument. A lot of women oppose the ERA, and in the 20th century, straight line from the anti-suffragist to the Stop ERA movement of the 1970s. These were women who were socially conservative, many of them identified as religiously conservative. And when they were anti-suffragists, they argued that the man in the house should speak for the whole house. And as they became the Stop ERA movement, they argued that this was somehow denigrating women and their protected status in the home, and that this would ultimately harm women by forcing them out of the home, which it would do no such thing. It would do absolutely no such thing. But that is an argument that landed at the time. And, there were some debates over would this allow things that affected only women? For example, the idea of maternity leave was a fairly new one in the 1970s. And many anti-ERA people argued that this would prevent maternity leave. And it absolutely doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. It would not affect pregnancy. What it would do is make sure that there was one more way to protect women when they were pregnant and during FMLA afterwards. And it would also, again, protect women who live with domestic violence, with sexual assault, provides a lot of different remedies that don't currently exist. And one that most people really want to have full benefit of insurance, for medical insurance. But there's a lot of discrimination. Being a woman is in many cases a pre-existing condition, and the ERA would put it in the Constitution that, again, anything that is related to sex, you cannot discriminate. So the idea that pregnancy is a pre-existing condition or many other things that affect women throughout their healthcare lives, that would be stopped. But where the Stop ERA movement was very effective was just throwing bombs and saying that this would make women, this would make women be just like men. And that's a point that landed with a lot of people. They're like, oh, wow, I'm not so sure that I want something like that in the Constitution. The one thing that they said that was true is also a product of the times. When the ERA movement was happening, the Vietnam War had just ended, and President Nixon had ended the draft in 1973. And the draft was not popular when it ended. And the Stop ERA folks said this would mean your daughters could be drafted, which is true, by the way. It's true. The Israeli army drafts women as well as men, to use an example that many people are familiar with. But for a lot of people, that was enough to get them to throw their brakes on and go, oh, I don't want my daughter to be drafted. Maybe they don't want anybody to be drafted, but they really don't want their daughter to be drafted. So again, scare tactics and misinformation did a lot to stop a movement that could have by now closed the gender pay gap. And I know that's something that a lot of Kentucky women are very concerned about.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. You mentioned Lieutenant Governor Thelma Stovall, which I love to tell that story about her convening the legislature. And I always say that that's why they don't let lieutenant governors convene preside over the legislature anymore.
Yeah.
But are there any other Kentucky women that are notable that you know about, or just any women in general that you think are worth a mention during this movement?
Well, there were a lot of Kentucky women who were instrumental in the ratification of women's suffrage. And Kentucky suffrage leaders like Laura Clay, for example, continued to be part of the movement for equality. So, unlike many states, the movement doesn't split between ERA folks and women's suffrage folks. The Kentucky movement promoted equality. And after the 19th Amendment was ratified, the Kentucky pro-suffrage movement actually became part of the League of Women Voters. They created the League of Women Voters of Kentucky. It's part of the national movement. And the League of Women Voters nationally and in this state has always supported the ERA because they see it as the last piece in the puzzle to make sure that the rights that should belong to us all actually do belong to us all.
That's great. So, are there any actions that we can take as it relates to the ERA? Do you know of any movements or any any kind of actionable items that you would suggest to people who want to get involved or do something
Mhm.
or see some changes?
Yeah, there are a lot of things people can do. And first of all, education, education, education. We would have the ERA right now if not for a successful scare tactic misinformation campaign. And I think we have to educate people about what equality means. It takes nothing away from anyone else. It makes sure that women are lifted up. I mean, there's no question that the bottom line is that, people's pocketbooks in Kentucky would be much richer if we had gender equity in pay. I mean, people's family money. We'd all have more money. That would be great. I don't think anybody's really against that. And I think that's the kind of thing we can push for. At this point, there was a movement at the end of 2024 to try to get this enrolled, this amendment that had 3 more states ratify it before 2024. And there was a movement led by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in New York to try to get this enrolled in the Constitution. So that's the term. And the official who's in charge of that is the Archivist of the United States. That's a very important office. And the archivist held that he couldn't enroll this amendment because 3 states had ratified it to hit 38, but they did so after the sunset in 1982. And that's where we are. So it's not part of the Constitution. So one could argue that Congress has to go back to the drawing board, that you need to have a new bill filed by a member of Congress, and it would go through the House of Representatives and the Senate, get the 2/3, and then go back out to the states. And that may look like a heavy lift, but I think if people, women and men, because lots of men supported the ERA, if people would just talk to their congressman or congresswoman, their senators, and say, hey, this is something we need, not to take anything away from anybody, because we need pay equity, because we need to make sure that there's a constitutional remedy for pregnancy discrimination, for insurance discrimination, and a lot of other things that people simply want, right? Everybody wants insurance to cover what it should cover. And I think it can be very much framed in the way that it was back in 1923, which is women need this power for political reasons, but also for economic reasons. Because in the 20s, a lot of women were breadwinners. 100 years later, we still are.
Yeah. So true. So, okay, so I have one more question and then we'll open it up to see if commissioners have any. But my last question is to you is we know that Women's Equality Day is coming up. And so what can we do to further the efforts of that cause?
I think that's a great day to write to our senators, to your congressmen, and say, hey, on Women's Equality Day, we still don't have gender pay equity. There is still pregnancy discrimination and FMLA discrimination. There is still insurance discrimination. And it's time that women became, as Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman saw it, full citizens of the United States and the state in which they reside. So, on behalf of Kentucky women, I know that I'll be reaching out to them and saying, hey, it's time for us to have our seat at the table and make sure it's in the Constitution like it should have been 100 years ago.
That's great. Thank you so much, Patty.
Oh,
And
thank you,
Lieutenant,
Lieutenant Governor.
well, I was going to jump in and just say that I wanted to lift up two Women's Equality Day events that we are aware of that we wanted to share in case anybody was interested. Both of them would be this coming Saturday on August 23rd. One in Frankfort here. The Liberty Hall Historic Site and the Kentucky Women's Alliance are celebrating Women's Equality Day with music and history, a walk through Women's History Trail through Liberty Hall Gardens, and a group discussion led by one of their education specialists. So that's at the Liberty Hall Historic Site, Saturday, August 23rd at 10 a.m. And then in Louisville, the Office for Women is hosting a Women's Equality Day event at Atherton High School that also starts at 10 a.m. to 12:30. I don't know what their content's going to be, but they do indicate that they have refreshments and childcare, interpretation services, and other languages upon request. So we just wanted to elevate those two opportunities for anyone to join if those are close to them. And if anybody knows of any others, we'd be happy to share them out with our followers. And I'll hand it off to if we have any commissioners on the call that have any questions for Patti or for the Lieutenant Governor.
Hello, everyone. I don't have a question, but I like that tagline that Patty said 20 years ago, women were the breadwinners, and today they still are. And I think that would be a launching pad segue when we talk about the focus on the government action of ERA, which you summed up greatly, where, originally it was supposed to unbroaden and unvague the phrase of equal rights for women, right? And so now the challenge and enforcement of defining or being a little bit more specific about how courts are supposed to help guide and enforce those broad principles of equal rights. So when you look at the ERA, no, it doesn't address primarily sex discrimination, violence against women, unequal pay, all the things that you said, and the need for better child care, because we still are. You go right back to it. It's a yo-yo. We still are the breadwinner. And in some places, we're the breadwinner for two generations because you may have the parent and the grandparent depending on the age of the mother or the father of the child or children. And so not only has ERA escaped the primary person, the mother, it could now be hitting, or I know it is hitting the grandparent and possibly the grandparent, just depends on the age and the genes of that household. And here we are 20 years ago, we were the breadwinner, and today we still are. And we're still dealing with that broad governance or fear and misinformation that the ERA would attack the traditional household and subject women to unnecessary harm professionally when we're talking about drafting in the military. And so that we're just not cognizant enough to make the decisions that we need to make under this ERA. So I think your tagline is pretty. I'm already making a tagline. I really think that kind of opens up and hopefully it will capture women when they think about it, and not necessarily one party or the other, but they go, yeah, you're right. Back in the 19 blah blah blah, here we are. we're still struggling to try to take care of our households, and I've got to do two jobs or a job and a half or 4 degrees and blah 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 to almost come up to Jim Bob in them. And it has a lot to do with color, but it has not a lot to do with color if you're a male in some instances. And so I think you need to put a pin in that statement and then let everything else in short order follow that. And I think every woman would have it resonate in their head and think, yeah, I am kind of standing in the same place, rowing with the same people versus being divisive about what um, equality looks like. That's my comment.
Oh, thank you so much, Commissioner. And again, you are a councilwoman in an area that has a military base. And
Yes.
in 1973, there was a big case, it's to your point. There was a case that involved a woman named Sharon Frontiero, and she was a service member, and she was the service member, not her husband. And her husband was not eligible for the dependent benefits. That
Yep.
had it been the other way around, had a man been in the service, his wife would have been eligible for the dependent benefits. That case went to the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as a lawyer, is the one who won that case at the Supreme Court. But that's simply a precedent, right? It said that you cannot deny benefits based on sex. And, so Sharon Frontiero's husband got his benefits. But case law is subject to change. That could be rolled back tomorrow. And one of the reasons that you need to constitutionalize rights is to make sure that you've got them, that they are enshrined in our governing document, because things can change really quickly. I mean, it really is. That sounds crazy to people, right? What do you mean husbands couldn't get benefits? But that's been in my lifetime. That's been in many of our
Yes.
lifetimes.
Yes.
So these are pocketbook issues that I think can cut through a lot of the partisan rhetoric. And thank you so much for your comments.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. And she was in the Air Force. Yep. I do remember that case. I think we covered a little bit of it during Command and General Staff College. And just
Okay.
interesting enough, we learned a lot about the GATT, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and so forth. What are we talking about now? That same 4 area that has a gas line, a natural gas deposit there, and I believe it was a train route that went through there. And so you're talking about things that are happening that we hear about back here. We think it's history, but it's happening in our lifetime. And so with her, she had that sex-based discrimination that people didn't think about. And it was so raw because the women in the military didn't become official until the 70s, but we had been in it for a long time, and no one ever thought about equal benefits for the person who's of the female gender to give to the spouse that is a male. And so it is in our lifetime, because you're talking, what, 72, 73.
73, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that perspective, Commissioner Owens. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions from our commissioners in the chat or any hands up. So I think with that, Patti or Lieutenant Governor, if you all have any closing remarks, we will move into those, and then I will close this out when you're done.
Oh, I'd simply like to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this in honor of National Equality Day, and to remind everyone that women's rights are human rights, and that this benefits everyone. Every family in Kentucky would benefit by having this protection in our U.S. Constitution. So I certainly hope that people will make those phone calls and send those emails on National Equality Day, because it's past time for women to have their seat at the table and their rights in our Constitution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patti Minter, and to all of our commissioners for joining us today. And I know that we'll all be celebrating in our own ways very soon on Women's Equality Day. So thank you for joining us.
And thank you both, Dr. Minter and Lieutenant Governor Coleman, and to all of our other commissioners who've joined us today. What a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much over the course of our conversations with commissioners, and we're going to keep them going. I appreciate you all being part of the series. Grateful for your expertise. I also just want to remind folks who might be watching us live or even archived, we will have our next conversations with commissioners in October of this year. That topic will be about domestic violence awareness in Kentucky, and how that impacts women here in the state. And if you are interested in keeping up with us for our future meetings, our events, or our programs, you can certainly subscribe to this channel that you're watching now, sign up through our Contact Us web page at our website, which is women.ky.gov. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook, or just send us an email at kcw@ky.gov. We look forward to seeing you all in October, if not sooner. Thank you for your time, your expertise, and I will talk to you all soon.